over here in front of you so we can pick you up.
My name is Chris Irwin. I understand that I'm being recorded. My name is Chris Irwin, and I don't mind being recorded.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing this with me, man.
I'm a lawyer. It's all right.
I guess I'll just go ahead and start. So when you first heard of this case, when you first heard of the news, and then figured out you were going to be working on it as a lawyer, what ran through your mind when you heard the details of the case and knew you were going to be on it as a lawyer? What did you start thinking about?
You mean my first legal opinion?
Yeah.
This is bullshit. That was my legal terminology. It was bullshit. I was like an 82-year-old nun got into the heart of the American nuclear weapons production complex, and I'm having to represent the nun? What the hell are these people thinking? You know, I grew up, my family's been in Knoxville. My Uncle Buford says for 6 generations. He says we had the first general store here. I have friends I had a friend, Maxie. He owned Maxie's Boat Dock. He had like half of his skin burnt nearly off by sodium hydroxide while he was working at the facility. He used to almost cry when he told the story. And I knew people that worked there, and we'd always been told for decades, look, whether you believe these are mobile death camps or you think that we need them for our national defense, they're secure. This is the Fort Knox of security. And in a couple of hours, everybody around here found that was a fucking lie. We had been lied to by the state. There's even a joke, what does Y-12 and the Tennessee defensive line have in common? Neither can keep an 82-year-old nun from penetrating their defenses. But this is unarguably one of the most deadly areas, not only on Earth, but in history of the planet. There's probably never been any place more deadly. And it was just mind-bogglingly crazy. Not only that they were able to do it, but instead of bringing in, they brought the full force of the state against this nun, and not a single person went to jail who accepted millions to secure this area. And I know why. It's because in World War II, they had over 1,000 armed soldiers on that facility, and to secure it. They believed that's what was necessary. They had maybe 3 active during all this. And it's because for corporations it's private corporations that are supposed to be, quote, handling the security, it's about the bottom line. It's cheaper to have cameras that don't work, motion detectors that are ignored, and fences than it is boots on the ground. Boots on the ground, you have to pay for health insurance, pensions, salaries. And for a private corporation, the tendency is always going to be to cut costs, cut corners, make it as cheap as possible. And the other thing is that came across my mind is it's dangerous to tell the emperor he has no clothes. They pointed out that the emperor has no clothes, and that was the result.
Yeah. So you're also an open anarchist. You've been, I don't know how long you've been an anarchist, but as an anarchist, 8 years?
Since I was 8.
Since you were 8, okay. So, since you were 8 years old, you've been an anarchist. So, as an anarchist, when you heard about this, what ran through your head?
Well, for one is that my perspective as an anarchist is whenever you centralize power, special interests hijack it. And the greatest atrocities in history are the product of centralized power. The very production of nuclear weapons would not be possible without large centralized nation states. The resources it takes to make such stupid-ass deadly weapons you can't do on a community basis. And I was familiar with how, whenever you centralize power, be it religious, philosophical, in the media, that special interests are always going to hijack it. But I'd never seen this aspect of the danger of the large nation state. I mean, statistically, you're safer having Hannibal Lecter move in next door to you and salt away a few Boy Scouts than having a nation state live next door. The greatest serial killers in history are the nation state. And I use the term anarchist. Really, I believe Henry David Thoreau said that which governs best governs least. And really, for my training as an attorney, I went in as a lawyer to law school, and I had bought the party line, in my 20s, that fuck the founding fathers, fuck the Constitution, a bunch of slaveholding bastards, blah, blah, blah. Hey, Emoja.
Hey, Chris.
How you doing today?
Great.
All right.
Good to see you.
As well. And, but then I took a class in constitutional law, and I read, what Thomas Paine wrote, and realized that there was no, not trusting large centralized government and governments, there's nothing more American than that. At the end of the Revolutionary War, my complete distrust and distaste of the centralized governments and the large nation states would have been duh. Everybody felt that way. It took a generation for people to even forget what the Revolutionary War was about. But yeah, for me, it's just further evidence that large centralized power not only leads to atrocities, but then leads to selling out to the lowest bidder, private corporations, and that they do a terrible, terrible job. And if those had actually been hostiles that had gone in, we might be living in a giant crater right now. I mean, seriously, if you had a detonation there, it could probably crack the Earth's mantle and wipe out all life on the face of the planet. You're dealing with some amazing amounts of weaponry. But I mean, the scientists there tell us, or the people in charge are like, there was no chance. They couldn't have detonated. They couldn't have gotten anything. But these are the same people that told us that it was secure and safe.
And then an 82-year-old nun went.
And an 82-year-old nun got through.
Break in.
And
so that's kind of leads into the next question I wanted. So we've heard the story. They used bolt cutters, came in.
Which they didn't need.
Well,
they needed it on the inner fences, but the outer fence is just shot full of holes.
Oh, really?
No, a reporter went out, and they didn't even find where they had gotten in. They'd gotten the wrong location. They had to be told where this gap was.
Oh, wow.
That had been tied back together with yarn.
Okay, so I guess that's it. So is there anything about the action that they did that we don't know about, that wasn't reported in the media so far? Or do we know all the details?
The media didn't report it at all. They had a picnic. They had a bloody damn picnic. They got in. They had time to eat bread. They had time to sing. They had time to spray biblical graffiti on the side of the wall. And then they got bored until finally they basically walked up to this one security guard that was on his cell phone in his SUV who realized what was going on.
They walked up to a security guard?
Well, he pulled up and they just sort of walked up and began singing.
Oh, God.
And I guess, I mean, you could, if you really research it, you could kind of get the idea what happened, but it's just so effing shocking. And my favorite quote was when it was pointed out how fucked up that fence was on the outer perimeter. The security Y-12 said, "Oh, well, that's not really a fence," in quotes. We consider it a border marker, a demarcation of border. But the truth of it is that it's a fence. It looks like a fence. It's supposed to be a fence. And that fence is in terrible condition. It's shot full of holes. What I hate to say as an environmentalist is what they need to do is they have all these trees that give perfect cover all the way to the top of the hill. They need to clear cut those. Then they need to have a clear line of sight at the top. But they're not taking the security there seriously. They're still not.
So, how did these three come together? Were there planning? How did they know each other? Were there planning strategies? Did it go according to plan? Was it easier than they thought? I guess, how did the whole thing come together to begin with?
Well, they're still my clients, and I still owe them an obligation of protecting them and not disclosing too much, because some of this could go get appealed. What I can say is that they know what's in the public record. They're a member of a group called Plowshares.
Okay.
Which engages in direct action all across the world. I'm not a Christian scholar, but I believe it comes from a quote from Isaiah. They shall turn spears into pruning hooks and swords into plowshares. And they have this crazy idea that thou shalt not... Tolstoy believed the same thing. I mean, if you want to look at an anarchist, it would be along the same lines. Tolstoy became an anarchist through his Christianity. He believed thou shalt not kill is something that you cannot compromise as. And as such, you can have nothing to do with governments that kill. All governments that kill. He didn't like the term anarchist, but he was. And they're kind of similar. They believe in not only that they should read the Gospels of Jesus, but they should act the Gospels. And their basis was really their Christianity, but they were also influenced by Martin Luther King, Henry David Thoreau, other of the classic nonviolent direct actionistas.
So are they anarchists, the Oak Ridge Three?
I don't.
Or libertarians? Or
No, I wouldn't know how to categorize them. The anarchists. Well, they come from all. It's interesting, the backgrounds. Many people don't realize. Mr. Wally served 2 tours in Vietnam and was decorated vet. He was on the Cambodian border. He was twice in Cambodia, once during Kent State, where he saw people die, at least 50 people die, and knew firsthand the results of the state warfare. So, in terms of, I can't put words in their mouths, it's 3 different individuals as well. But in terms of militarization, and the rhetoric that comes out of their mouth is 10 times more militant than 9 out of 10 of the kids with the A stickers and patches that they wear around.
Right.
So in terms of their activities, and I definitely wouldn't categorize them as communist. So I don't know though. I would have to ask.
Okay, cool. So why did they do it? Was it to call attention to nuclear arms? Was it to call attention to war in general?
Both.
Yeah.
And again, they believe thou shalt not kill is something you can't compromise on.
Okay.
They view those basically as mobile death camps. In World War II, they brought the people to the camps. It's some weird, twisted obscenity of consumer convenience culture. Now we figured out how to bring the death camps to the people. And they believe that, in a life dedicated to service, they can't do that anymore. So, getting the weekend started. And they believe they're Christians in the truest sense of the word. Jesus, I just read the Gospels for the first time. I wasn't raised a Christian. And I'd been in a Christian church maybe twice up until the age of 18. And I began reading the Gospels for the first time about 2 months ago. And Jesus I came at it as an anarchist and as an organizer. And I realized a couple of things. The reason Jesus got assassinated was, A, it looked like he was putting together a private army in the desert. Most of his miracles revolve around logistics, water into wine. My favorite one is when he sent he had to feed all these people. They were coming into a town, and he sent 2 of his boys in and said, look, find the second guy that's coming from the well in the town and tell him, look, we're going to have our private army come into your town. We'd like a room on the 2nd floor and food waiting for us. So, of course, what do you do when a private army's coming into your town? They come in, sure enough, on the 2nd floor, there's food. And they're like, it's an effing miracle. Jesus was a rabbi, but he was an organizer, first and foremost. And he was becoming a threat to the status quo, to the rabbis. So they used the Roman military to take him out because they knew that the religious establishment couldn't do it. I think he gets a bad rap just because of how he's been misused. But I think if Jesus was around today on the streets, well, he'd probably be on death row or in the prison pretty quickly. But he'd be with them. Right. They've seen through all the bullshit and stuff that's accumulated, and I think they're probably more like Gibbon wrote in Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire that the Roman judges there would be 3 judges, and that they would write back to Rome that they would have problems because they would have Christians that would get arrested for crimes that would demand the death penalty. And they'd be like, but we don't do the death penalty for that. Really, the Romans only did the death penalty for treason and for being a thief. But they were such zealots. They believed it was a straight ticket to heaven. And I think that they're closer, those 3 are closer to being true Christians than the Pope. Yeah. Than any of the Christians that go into the churches today.
Cool. So a lot of planning had to go into this. Obviously, you don't just do an action like this. So why did they pick when they did it? Why did they go that day? Is there
I used to know.
Oh, so they're okay. I didn't know.
They had a reason.
It
was something to do with date or time, but it didn't come up in trial.
Okay.
So I don't remember.
Okay, cool. Okay, in custody. How were they treated in custody? Was it?
Oh, well, Sister Rice is pissed off. They all got a good look at the industrial prison complex, and she dedicated about half her, you get an allocution during sentencing. She went on for about an hour and a half. About half of that was about the prison industrial complex, about the private prison systems, about how she was glad that she'd gotten a PhD in prisons, that the prisons were overcrowded, that not packed with nonviolent offenders. They had been in custody before, but they were in Blount County too, which is a cesspool jail, overcrowded, sticky floors. But federal custody is typically better than state, more resources, better jails and stuff. They spent some of their time in Ocilla, Georgia. That's the holding pen, and that's better conditions. As far as being an animal stuck in a cage for a truly non-violent offense. But I guess I characterize it as the prison industry. They're the slave ships of our century, but we don't have a corresponding abolitionist movement that we had during slave periods, and their perspective was more educated than most anarchists, and their rhetoric was more radical. They were really, especially Sister Rice, she really hates the sheer waste and destructive impact of the prison industrial complex. And she educated the judge and everybody in the courtroom. Here's a woman, her issue is Y-12 and nuclear weapons. But she saw wrong while she was in jail and dedicated half of what she was saying so the media and others would hear what's also going on in the prisons. This wasn't just a single act. This is just part of an overall life of service and radicalism. And they didn't have, they're consistent. They're consistent in it, and it shows that it's more of a broad philosophy than just like a single shot act of some activists that got a good idea one night. And their philosophy shows in how they treated justice across the board, not simply from money robbed from the poor through militarism, but then also what's happening in prisons. Michael Wally serves food to the homeless, helps out soup kitchens, integrating former prisoners back into society. Their whole lives are dedicated, every aspect of service to this philosophy, and it was reflected in their outlook and how they, worked and advocated for people while in custody. Kind of like you read Alexander Bergman's autobiography. Everybody's read Emma Goldman's autobiography. But they don't realize hers kind of started where his starts. She got to have this cool life of traveling around the country and speaking and all this stuff. They put him in the tombs for 22 years and tried to kill him. Yeah. And you read about, he continued his life to service and was just as radical and militant as she was while he was in this hellhole catacombs, defending other prisoners, refusing to rat, earning respect. And I really didn't get kind of that philosophical, they're like rocks. They don't bend, they don't fold, they maintain consistency. And these people have that same kind of classical anarchist consistency in what they do.
Wow, nice. So, how about in the courtroom itself? So, how were they portrayed by the prosecution as their defense attorney? How did you try to combat that? Were these people smeared as something as people who advocate violence or anything like that? Or
no, that wouldn't have floated at all. The prosecutor did his job. He acknowledged that he was Catholic too, and he's a Catholic nun he's putting away. He acknowledged that they were nonviolent. He tried to focus that they were misdirected, misguided, and then focused on the elements of the offense. Did they have an intent to interfere with the national security of the United States? Did they damage or contaminate? And he focused on the elements and used that to prove his case. And then, they didn't deny for a second what they did. Hell, while they're out on bond, they did interviews about what they did. They did it on television. They did it on radio. So he didn't really need to demonize them. And Theodore, he's a conflicted, but he did his job.
Cool. So cool. That was it then. So why are they asking for the max penalty, or at least Miss Rice is?
Oh yeah, because the maximum is 30 years.
Okay.
Because
she was asking for life in prison, right? Yeah. Why make a request?
She's 85.
Okay.
Because they're willing to be martyrs for their cause. They believe, it doesn't matter. They're not in prison. They're just in a cell humans put them in. And it's propaganda by the deed. They wanted to show she meant it. She was like, you can't do it. This is just, what did Yoda say? This crude matter, we are not beings of light, we are. And she is a being of light. For some, non-compromising on principle and philosophy is really rare in this society. And that's their position.
Wow. They
wanted to communicate. And they saw also that the people who engage in nonviolent civil disobedience were watching what was happening. And through showing, it's like, no, we're not going to back down. We are principled human beings, and the state, all they can do is take our lives. It's all you've got. The worst you can do is take our lives and incarcerate these bodies we have. And for those that are truly embraced in a philosophy, that's no threat at all. And it was no threat to her. She didn't care. She's like, all right, I'm 85 now? She's like, yeah, put me away for life. 10-year sentence is probably life.
Wow.
And they were all three. They did not repent an ounce of what they did.
Right.
Made me proud to represent them.
Yeah, and that's one of the, I guess that's kind of about the case, I guess that might be about my final question. I mean, they weren't repentant at all, which is great. And
they said they would do it again if released.
So how was that reaction? I mean, I guess sitting from the outside, when you, a judge who just gives a sentence, and then to have somebody say, that's not enough, or, I'll go do it again. I mean, how does something like that go over in a court system like that? What was the reaction within the courtroom?
Well, I can tell you what my reaction is. I'm not used to my clients saying that. After I'd argued for about 2 hours, and then for my clients to basically be like, all you can do is put us away for the rest of our lives, Judge. You have no power here. We consider ourselves, have a higher ruling from a higher court. Made me sweat blood a little bit, because as an attorney, my job is to get people at least amount of time as possible and save them as much money as possible. So this was, but as an activist, even then, but it was outside of everybody's range of experience. It took it. I mean, the legal system is a well-oiled, life-gobbling machine.
Yeah.
And having somebody say, you got no power, put us away, give us more time, takes it out of the realm of that machine. They don't know how to deal with it. And it played into the deterrence argument. Because that's one of the 7 factors they're supposed to look at sentencing, is deterrence. And I wish now I'd argued there is no deterrence here, Your Honor. You're not going to deter them. We shouldn't even be talking about that.
Yeah.
But so they used it, and the judge.
And what's this deterrence again? What exactly is that?
Keep other activists,
keep other people from doing it.
And to keep them from doing it again.
Okay.
And so he kind of dumped it, keep them from doing it again, and just used it to say, well, to show other activists not to do this. And it was outside of the realm of, you don't see that every day.
Right.
You never see that, so you have gangsters that talk about it, but like I've represented Bloods, Vice Lords, Crips, MS-13s, crack dealers, meth addicts, prostitutions, shooters, across the board. And, often they'll talk, fuck the police, blah, 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 blah. But at the end of the day, most of them cooperate. Most of them, they're all humble and like, please, Your Honor, they don't want to be in these hellholes. And it's interesting to see an octogenarian, show more true gangsta than your average Blood or Crip.
Yeah.
It was inspiring. It was definitely inspiring. And I'm going to get the transcript for the whole trial eventually, and just to read it again.
Yeah.
But it what's is that, a Pomeranian?
It is. Yep.
Little deal. I have 2 Chihuahuas. Yeah, my dogs would love you. Oh, little sweetie. Is it a female or a male?
It's a male.
He can smell my Chihuahuas. He's like, you smell good. You smell like me. Yeah. Oh, what a sweetie. How old is he?
3 months.
Oh, goodness. So he'll get a little bigger?
Yep.
Yeah. What a little puppy. I gotta start bringing my dog out.
Cool deal, man. Yeah, we got 2 big dogs.
Yeah, I wish I'd gotten your worm farm for you, then I could give it back right now.
Yeah.
I didn't have transportation then, and I also had a car. I'm at a case, so.
that's how it goes. We gave it to a buddy who lives at Log Haven now.
Oh,
so
good. Somebody got it.
It's getting some good use.
Sweet.
So I guess, I'll ask you a final wrap-up question, but I guess the next few are more kind of like a personal note, I guess. So why, so how'd you come about the legal profession? So as an anarchist, what led you into the legal profession, and then from there, what criminal defense? I kind of imagine that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got arrested so many times for civil disobedience that I had to sit through my court proceedings, and usually they put us at the end of the docket, so I had to sit through everybody else's court proceedings. And then my friends came to my court proceedings, so when they got arrested for CD, I got arrested with food not bombs in San Francisco, and I was arrested in, Eugene, Oregon for the whole Cove Mallard campaign, in Idaho. I didn't get arrested in Idaho, though. Colorado, food not bombs here, blockades, the whole Earth First thing. And I sat through it all, and I was like, I could do that. I could be able to do that. I like to argue. And then I realized, too, I'm a dinosaur. Active anarchist organizers that are my age, that started like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, like I did, I can count on one hand that are still organizing. We have a higher turnover rate than McDonald's in this movement. And my wife and I, at the time, we were in our late 20s, we sat down and we wrote down every reason we saw our activist people checking out. And often it just came down to that, dumpster diving and, couch surfing is okay for like your 20s and stuff. But eventually you want people, it's a human thing, want a little bit more security, want a little more comfort. And the classical anarchists all had straight jobs. Emma Goldman was a nurse, they made shoes, some attorneys, unless you were born rich Russian nobility, which I wasn't. And I lost my job I had on 9/11. I was cleaning the outsides of skyscrapers, and my wife wanted to stay here. I wanted to go back to school just to hide out for a while. I was like, well, I'll just go to law school. And law school is really it's like reading the rule box of society. It's reading the cereal box. And I wanted new tools, too. I'd basically exhausted all the tactics I'd used up till then. And first I got access to people. And then I learned some funky stuff. Like they say, stupid people judge you by your appearance. I have news for everybody. Smart people judge you by your appearance, too. And I would get all my suits and shit come from Goodwill. But I'll go into Panera's for breakfast in my suit and tie, and they're like, yes, sir, no, sir, right away, sir, we made you wait, sir, that one's free. And then I'll literally go home garden, put on my normal human clothes, go back to the same place, and it's the same people, and they'll be talking with each other. And they'll just ignore me. Also, my job as a criminal defense attorney is to take as much money from corporations as possible and to keep people out of prison for bullshit victimless crimes. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And I also, Thoreau said most men lead lives of quiet desperation. I had no idea until I interviewed my first 100 clients what a relative life of privilege I'd led as a sort of environmentalist, anarchist, that had gotten. I had no idea the amount of rape and children's sexual abuse and how many people are just doing drugs to try to kill that part of their brain that happened when they were kids. It was brutally disillusioning, but I believe illusions interfere with an ability to lead a good life, so I embrace that. So for now, and also defense attorneys, we're the ones that tell the state, you can't go further. There's a line here, you can't go further than this. And I like being on the front lines. I like being able to hear and see exactly where the state is encroaching. And it's terms of the disillusioning like I learned that, I don't, everybody's like, fuck the police often. They're idiots. What we have is a system of laws passed by rich white people, enforced against poor and working class people, enforced by working class officers who are just cogs, while upper middle class and middle class lawyers and judges profit from the whole wicked state of affairs. And it gave me a practical knowledge. And also I've noticed, like, I've locked down, I stopped a strip mine for a year and a half. I used to lock myself by my neck to bulldozers and gates. I've organized those protests against strip mines where we shut them down for an hour. Where with just pushing paper back and forth, I shut down a strip mine for over a year and made them pay us afterward a significant amount of cash, which we used to finance our other activities. And I like attacking corporations, making them pay, and then steering that money back into the different righteous causes. The average criminal defense attorney, though, lasts for about 6 years. And I'd like to think that one of the reasons I've lasted a little longer, I'm up to 8 years now, is that I came into the system with not any illusions. And I got re-educated and realized I was largely ignorant about what's actually going on. But when I talk to my clients, I purely give them the anarchist rap. I'm like, look, if you have any illusions that this is about justice or fairness or rationality, you need to get rid of that. This is about money and time. The state wants your ass, and I'm trying to save that for you. And what's pathetic is 98% of my clients go, yeah, I knew that. I'm glad you know it, though. It's good to hear my attorney knows that. I get like maybe 1 or 2 clients that have gone, really? Really? And I dig the interaction with the poor and the working class. I like defending them in court. I like seeing what's going on. And I think it's given me a more stable platform as to understanding the society I'm organizing in. I'm not just I'm overread. I got into anarchy because of Kropotkin and Tolstoy and the Stoic philosophers of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and the whole deal, and Goldman and all of them. But now that I've actually gotten into the guts of what's going on, it's radicalized me. And I base my opinions now more on human suffering and what I've witnessed firsthand than things I've gotten out of a book.
Yeah.
So, and that's the other thing is you got to work. You have to work to survive. And if I have to work to survive, I'd like to get paid as much as possible so I can work as little as possible and use the rest of the time to do what I want to, organize or whatever.
Right.
It hasn't really worked out like that. That was the theory in school,
right.
But what I find is half my practice is pro bono.
So is there a work versus labor mentality? Do you hold a work versus labor mentality? Is labor different from work for you?
I don't know. I can't. I know
So
the difference.
so you're saying free up things that you want to do, like to organize and be able to do all that stuff. That sounds like work. Gardening would be work. So do you view your time in the court as a lawyer? Do you view that differently than these other things that you want to do, or is it just kind of part of your routine?
It's an intellectual distinction, but I really do what I feel like doing. I take cases that are pointed to me that I want to take. That's a good thing. I'm a solo practitioner. I was with a partnership at the beginning, but I don't want to work with a firm. If I want to take early Friday off, like right now, and drink beer and talk about anarchy, I don't have a boss.
Right.
So, plus so I like not having a boss. I like having my time. But I like what I do. I find it interesting. I like to research. I spent over 200 hours of research in this case. Just raw reading and writing. And I couldn't do that. And I think one of the reasons it gives me any competence in this profession is I do it because I like it. It's not because of money, God knows.
Right.
So.
I totally get that. No, because I feel the same way about stuff. So I'm an up-and-coming anarchist myself, though. I have not been since I was eight years old.
I think we're all born distrusting the state.
Yeah.
There's a classic flyer that has a baby on it, 8 different segments, and it's. I think we have to be trained to accept centralized power.
Yeah.
And this very concept of a representative democracy is an oxymoron.
Right.
And democracy is by the people. Also, if you get a chance, you should read Aristotle's essay on the development of this concept we call democracy in Athens. It's a real eye-opener.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I will check that out. I guess for the interview, the only other thing I have, is there anything else you want to say? Anything about the case? Anything about your client? Anything about what we can expect to come down the pike in the future?
Well, I got 2 things in terms of the future. I think that in the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to have, what's going to go down in the climate. I spent years and years studying cliff faces. And I got this crazy idea at one time that when you look in a cliff face, you see a climactic record.
Yeah.
And I began researching it and found that the estimates are that limestone is the result of coral and algae. And it takes about 1,700 years for an inch of limestone to form. So when you see a foot of limestone, or say 10 inches of limestone, you're looking at 17,000 years of relative climatic stability. And that coral requires a specific depth and temperature to grow, so of a wet period. And then I found that coal actually takes about 700 years, and that's from swamps,
right.
Ferns and the rest. Marble is actually from deep seas, bryozoans, these deep sea organisms.
Yeah, I mean, well, marble's, that's some, yeah. I mean, so, it's limestone that's
true. So what I was fascinated by was the layers I saw. And I began tracking it, and there's a predictable shift in the bands that happens every time the Earth shifts its magnetic axis.
Yeah.
It's like, what, every 88,000 years?
I don't know.
I saw it on the show, and in England they use it to date where they're at in it. And what was interesting was, though, that the layer of shift, and we seem to have tracked when every shift happened. Like volcanic eruptions, volcanic ashes have a specific iron content. It's a fingerprint. So they can tell from that layer, oh, this is when this mega volcano blew the fuck up, spewed stuff so into the atmosphere that it changed the climate drastically. And then from meteor impacts, from the cesium, that it's a specific radioactive element with decay. And we pretty much know why all these different shifts in the bands happen. But what it becomes apparent is that the Earth tends towards a climatic equilibrium, it appears. You see, and that we're generally been in a real dry period in terms of our climate. But when it shifts from these bands, it's radical. I mean, you get entire continents that'll reemerge and submerge in like 100 years. And that it'll, really drastic change. And in the 80s and 90s, I read like the Trends 90 reports from the Oak Ridge National Laboratories. I read the World Watch Institute reports and studies on climate change. I read, I had a class with Sherry Cable, and she had me look at a lot of these projections. That what they would do is they would take their numbers and then they would run it backwards in time through the computers to see if it accurately predicted weather patterns in the past. And they found that it did. And one of the things that's been interesting is they were all been right on in terms of fires in the West Coast and drought patterns and the rest, but they all failed at one common element, all the different studies. And it's the rate things have happened. It's been faster than any of these studies projected. And the only study, so to speak, that has tracked where we're at with our climate has been what you see in the cliff faces. And how I picture it is, in terms of equilibrium, it's like a gyroscope where you pull the cord and it stays upright, but when it starts to lose it, it starts to wobble. And I think right now it appears to me that we're in a period where the Earth's climatic equilibrium is starting to wobble. I mean, I'm not saying it's an example, but like the polar vortex starting to shift off the poles, it's kind of like that. You know how those tops wobble. And I think in the next 20 years, we're going to see massive environmental refugee populations.
Yeah,
we're going to lose a major city. Yeah. And what's going to happen is, and I remember just like 10 years ago when Al Gore did his report on An Inconvenient Truth, the right wing laughed at him about New York flooding.
Right.
They're not laughing anymore. And I think what will happen is when one of these major events happens in a first world or European country, it's going to cause the insurance companies to collapse. And that's going to trigger a major economic collapse among the world's economies. And the truth of it is that the current system, the status quo, is very unstable. It requires a shit ton of blood and resources to maintain it. I mean, and one of the reasons for that is it's not a natural model. You don't see in nature large centralized structures. Diversity, cooperation, diversity are more the rules in the forest. And I think because it's such an unnatural model, it requires a shit ton of resources to maintain the 1%, so to speak. And I think as conditions get worse, the current model is going to collapse. And by definition, necessity, the grassroots, more anarchist, decentralized city-state models are going to become what we're going to have to fall back on to survive. And, if there's any anarchist or cockroach scientist 100 years from now digging this out of the, rubble of what's left of our civilization and hearing this, is that, we need to not only start saying what we think is going to happen, but start planning on it. Planting perennials, planting trees, getting ready for the coming change, because it's not if change is going to come or if it's going to be radical. It's a foregone conclusion in my mind. And the thing is, the science geek in me, I literally could see a huge flooding tidal wave drowning the entire continent and stand up the hill seeing the waves come, and I would be like, damn, this is cool.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. The science geek in me appreciates, but the sheer toll and human misery that it's going to take is going to be beyond, and it's going to happen faster than people think, a lot faster. We're getting there. Some of the triggers are I believe the aquifers on the coastal aquifers are going to start salinating. They already are.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also a lot of the rice fields in Asia and the third world are almost at sea level. They're going to start salinating, and they're going to lose huge segments of their crops.
And we're going to pump tar sands through the continental aquifers, so,
Yeah, that's my disaster analysis. And the other thing, and the danger of giving me beer and telling me if I have anything to say is evident, but I also think anybody that calls themselves an anarchist should read Aristotle's essay on the evolution of this concept we call democracy, because we've surrendered so much in this country, and we grasp all these European radicals and philosophies as something we should embrace, but we've forgotten that Peter Kropotkin, the guy who termed the word anarchist, was a...
Was it Kropotkin?
I believe so.
Was it Prudhomme? Was it Pierre?
Between the two. I know that he got tagged with... Mutual Aid was a real groundbreaking work, and he gets attributed with it.
And was that was Kropotkin? No, that was Prudhomme, right? That was...
Mutual Aid?
Mutual Aid was Prudhomme, right?
No, that was Kropotkin.
That was Kropotkin, okay.
Yeah. But he wrote in Vanguard Press, he wrote a book analysis of the French Revolution. And he said there were three people that stayed true to the French Revolution from the very beginning to the very end. And you know who one of them was? Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine was a brilliant radical that never sold out anybody, never owned a slave. And we've thrown out and we've ceded to the right wing and to the government, our history and the revolutionary history of America. And I did too. But then I actually read, what was written, and like the Supreme Court has said, the clearest interpretation of why we have the Second Amendment is that it was put in there for when, not if, but when our government becomes oppressive, to give our citizens tools to overthrow our government.
Right.
That's what the Supreme Court has said, the interpretation. We've really kind of renounced the radicalism of the founding, and you realize that 90% of the people that fought in the American Revolutionary War were farmers.
Yeah.
They were not rich slaveholding, and I think too often we've rejected that. And a lot of what we call anarchy today, if you'd been around after the first American Revolution, they would have just been like, well, yeah.
Right. Well, anarchy's making a comeback, right? Maybe. Liberty's making a comeback. Maybe anarchy's making a comeback. It's a distorted comeback, so there's the vulgarism out there, the right-wing, capture of what liberty is supposed to be and everything, but at least it's making a comeback. Well, but it's there, since it's there, it's met with even more force, right? Like, well, those people are radicals, those people are crazy, we shouldn't be talking about this, of course the status quo is okay.
What Aristotle said was that the middle class is kind of a rudder for society, and when the middle class erodes, the dialogue between the oligarchs and the poor becomes more and more extreme, which is what's happening. Our middle class is dissolved in the society, is continuing to. So we're getting between extremes of the right and what he would call extremes of democracy, which I would argue that extremes in democracy is no vice. But anyway, back to his essay on the evolution of democracy. He wrote that and Aristotle was no fan of democracy. He thought it was the third lowest form of government. And he wrote that in the beginning, that things were as bad as you could imagine in Athens. You were the haves and the have-nots, and if you were have-not, you were property. You could be killed on sight. They could do prima nocta. Did not happen in England. It started in it was in Athens, where they could literally rape your wife on the first night of marriage as a matter of right. You could be hunted like an animal, and for Aristotle to be like, yeah, it was effing bad. That gives you an idea. And he wrote this essay like some third grade student or fourth grade student that has to write an essay they don't really like, but they've got to do it. Except he happened to be one of the most brilliant minds of the century. And he wrote that what happened was that people eventually revolted. And that when they revolted, they won. And they won basic rights. You can't kill us. You can't hunt us. And the oligarchs, who we'd call the 1%, began subverting these new rights. And it got to the point where the people had to revolt again, and they demanded even more this time. And they won. And the oligarchs once again subverted these basic human rights. So the people revolted, and it's the third revolution, which is interesting to me, because this cat named Stalin became the emperor. Stalin instituted what I call the Fight Club rules of democracy. He said it was his observation that during these power struggles, most citizens would rather just sit on their butt and watch, not have anything to do with it. So he said when a power struggle breaks out, you have to pick up sides. You have to pick up arms. If you don't, you lose your citizenship. Then he passed all these new egalitarian rules and laws, made a matching set of poetry to explain it, and then he exiled himself from the city so nobody could use it. So what happened? Well, the oligarchs began subverting the new democratic institutions after a while, and the people revolted again and demanded even more. There were about 8 of these revolutions, and it's through these revolutions that this concept we call democracy came about. And one aspect of this is Aristotle would say that democracy is the product of class warfare. In fact, he would argue that it's impossible to talk about democracy historically outside of the concept of class warfare. And that leads to an interesting question is, if that's the pattern and cycle of democracy, where are we at right now? And then it also leads you back to the first American Revolutionary War, where everybody could read.
Right.
They wrote that, and that's one common misperception, that pre-revolutionary America was illiterate. No, actually, finding somebody who couldn't read was as rare as finding like a white owl, I think is what Franklin said. And they had read Aristotle. They knew about this, and when you read what they wrote, they expected us to rebel long before now. I think they'd be shocked if somebody had come up and said, 200 years from now, the American people still will not have a revolution. They'd be like, what? That's part of the product of...
Right.
And then the other
And why is that? How did all this happen?
Well, I mean, you can throw in a lot of questions, like what does this cycle mean in a society that dumps metric tons of pacifying pharmaceuticals into the populace every day? Well, my brother and others who I've talked to about this in psychology and philosophy they say it doesn't mean a damn thing. They use what they call the misery index. Once people get miserable enough, they will rebel. They will revolt. And I think the other is KRS-One calls it miseducation. I mean, through our public school system, it's implied or we're outright taught that serious social change movements towards revolution have never succeeded, and the ones that did failed. We don't teach the real history of our areas.
That's true.
You get periodic gap, like the people's history, it'll give you aspects of it. But everything in our society is geared towards pacifying people, keeping them poor enough and working hard enough. And also, I think, our decaying social capital. I picked up a book that I read 2 pages of in the library one day, and they had established this mathematical calculus. They'd gone to old people, and they'd ask them, what gave you a meaningful life? And then they established a point system based on that. And one of the things they found was that membership in a group or community doubled what they called social capital for somebody. But what they found was that the opportunities for social capital since the 50s had been decimated. In the 50s, everybody was a member of the Kiwanis or Bowling League or connected. But now, everyone's isolated, segmented, and, miseducated. And
until now, right? I mean, in the age of the internet, we're making new. It's the term open source insurgency, right?
Yeah.
Like we're doing it. We're not just doing it a local Kiwanis club. Like we're connected to people on the other side of the planet now.
Yeah, you could argue that we are. It's beautiful almost by design. You wanted to design a system that kept people pacified and ignorant and of their own history and science, and working just enough and panic just enough and have just enough unemployment rate. This would be This would be it. This would be a brilliant way of going about it. And I think the fact that we don't teach history in schools, we don't. We teach dates, but we don't teach history as if we all we taught in the public school system was Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. That's all we taught, which is 5 books. We would know 50 times more about history and create more inquisitive minds than we have today.
Yeah.
And I had a libertarian professor one day, and how he explained it was that all revolutions, he had this graph that he plotted, and social change happens when things get good and then they get bad. And it's just things have got to go up, plateau, and then get bad. And I think that, through a combination of miseducation, isolation, and separation, that we've created a society where people don't have. People will do anything for community. And what do they sell cars with? Community. They're like, look, you'll have friends if you have a nice car. You'll have. The advertisers know it. That's what we want as monkeys. But and that's one of the problems we have with organizing as well. The IWW put it really well. They said, look, we take people for 2 hours a week and say, get together and be egalitarian. But their families aren't egalitarian. They're hierarchical from the dog down to up to the father. Where they work isn't egalitarian. They don't get no vote in what they say or do. Their schools aren't egalitarian. They don't get to pick until maybe they're in college a little bit what they study. Their government isn't egalitarian. It's a representative democracy, which is an oxymoron, and it's not really, it's not egalitarian. We take people that have literally almost no real day-to-day experience in democratic ideals and egalitarian working together, and we throw them together and say, all right, now work together. And what's funny is we do, and I think if it wasn't ingrained as primates, we should be better at working together. That goes back to Kropotkin's analysis of cooperation. He found that he lived during the age of Darwin, when the social Darwinists were saying that competition is more the rule of nature, so it's okay to have 8-year-olds working in coal mines. And what Kropotkin did was he was doing a taxonomic inventory in the steppes of Russia, and he's a good scientist. He's thinking about this because Darwin's theories are red hot right then.
Right.
And he's seeing far more examples of cooperation than competition. And then he did something that's amazing, and they didn't have phones back then, let alone the internet. And doing it today, we would have a hard time doing it. And he had scientists from all over the world write him exhaustive examples of cooperation. And that's what mutual aid is. It's just a scientific compendium of cooperation from species from all around the planet. But then he did that made him a great natural scientist. But what made him a social scientist is he did what the social Darwinists did and said, well, if cooperation is more the model in nature, why isn't it more the model among us, people? And his argument was, well, the state. We have what KRS-One calls miseducation. And later primate studies like Jane Goodall and others bared him out. Just as monkeys, we should be better at working with one another than we are. But we have a system, and if it wasn't innate, our cooperative sense, we would never overcome this lifetime of miseducation. We would never be able to learn how to work together through these meetings. But we do. I've seen it. It can take up to 2 years, but people can and then do amazing shit when they finally learn how to put down their egos and put their causes before, this misprogramming they've got. But I think that's it's not a short answer, but it's not a short question.
Right.
I think that kind of explains it, is the miseducation and lack of experience in egalitarian relationships, the devolution of social capital in our society, and in the hamster wheel. And that's the other aspect. Every world's religious tradition says one thing in common pretty much. Buddhism, the Gita, whatever you read, the Bible, when you look, and it says that materialism leads to ruination of spirit and the soul. But we live in a society that constantly hypes anxieties and materialism and never ask ourselves, well, what does that mean? You know, and I think it literally ruins people's spirits. And so I think it's a combination, and this is the fish in the fishbowl problem, looking at all these disparate elements and pulling them together, but that's kind of what I do. And so, yeah, I think that it's a combination of factors, and that, I mean, often we're so impatient, and it causes interesting trends. In like 25 years of organizing, I've noticed that when we get groups that start to go above 20 people, infighting starts to break out, cliques start to form. Or when it's around 2 years, once you get the group that, you know, start forming, that you get amazing shit done, but then people start, you know, fighting over bullshit often and tearing apart their group. Also, in this country, the radicals, we decapitate anybody perceived as leadership.
Well, that's the big argument against it, right? Well, we're not, you know, cooperation's not going to work because we're not cooperative. We're going to argue over the details. We're never getting anything done. I mean, that is one of the classic arguments against anarchism, against democracy.
But it's a failed understanding of biology, of primate studies, of, you know, monkeys work really well together. I've seen 50 monkeys. I saw on the plains of Africa when I was on the Peace Corps. I was driving a truck, and there were 50 baboons that were sitting, maxing and relaxing in the sunshine. And my guy behind me fired a shotgun trying to shoot one of them for food. And I hit the brakes and nearly threw him out of the car. I was so pissed. And I saw the male monkeys ran to the front, and the females came down, scooped up the young ones, and pulled out as the males kept their bodies between us and them. And then they shrank the circle as they got away from us. And they were screaming at us. They were like, "You fucking monkeys, why did you do that? We're just out here maxing and relaxing, and you do this shit." And it's not like that. We don't have, you know, this. It's and the thing is, corporations, they are not competitive internally. If corporations were truly competitive, as we emphasize competition, they would tear themselves apart.
Right.
Now, what they are is they're dog sleds with everybody hooked together and lashed for the common good of the guy behind the sled. But it's not, you know, lack of cooperation. And
do you still see a difference between big corporations and government? Some people have started adopting the term corporation state. So,
it's not a new term. They used to call that the corporate welfare state. But no, the word for that, if you look up the dictionaries around the 50s, the definition of fascism is the combination of when government and corporations combine. In fact, that's what in World War I, Mussolini did. He formed I used to know the phrase in Italian, the corporenzo di something the other, which was a combination of companies and the state. And it's that's what fascism is. And it used to be you go open up the older dictionaries, and that's how they define fascism. So, no, I think there is a distinction. And I think that, we did institute our government for rule of the people. They just expected us to break that cycle, like I was talking about in Aristotle. And you get the government you deserve to a degree. And we as a people kind of abandon our democratic, not necessity, responsibilities by allowing the state of affairs to happen. I mean, America used to stand for revolution worldwide. This is for a brief period, mind you, till we became the empire. But for like 50 years, we supported revolutions. We considered revolution good for the sake of it. When I hear Americans point at Egypt, too, going, "Oh my God, there's no stability, they're still fighting," it just shows such a fundamental historical ignorance as to where democracy came from. Or, my favorite, when I hear the idiot, bombastic baboons on hate radio they're talking about class warfare. They're talking about class warfare. That just shows a fundamental ignorance as to the history of democracy, which is the product of class warfare. You know, it's a feature, not a bug.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's a combination of all between, the KRS-One put it most succinctly, miseducation. And, the other damaging thing we tend to do is, when you read about Emma Goldman and Kropotkin and the anarchist movements in the early 19th century, it was opposite as it is today. It wasn't a youth movements. The movements weren't youth movements. You could go to if you were an anarchist, you could go to 12 different anarchists in their 50s and 60s and learn from and not reinvent the wheel and learn how to organize. You didn't like one, go to the other. They used Johann Most. And then you had World War I and the Palmer raids that blew apart the leadership, imprisoned them, shipped many of them overseas, and then before things could reestablish in the natural order, you had the McCarthy era, World War II, which continually the state became. This isn't my idea. Rules for Radicals. Saul Alinsky pointed this out. He was like, look, man, I'm in the 60s. We got all these kids organizing now because all the older anarchists and radicals got taken out, driven underground, driven overseas, and they're having to recreate the wheel. So I'm writing these books to sort of give the old guard perspective from back in the day. But then what did we get? COINTELPRO, which began instituting even a more subversive manner. And I think in a way what's happened in the American radical movements is we have instituted at one time what the government put on us. The cycle, and in Earth First, which I saw, in my 20s and 30s, that anybody that got old, and I was back then I was in my 20s, but I noticed that anybody that got perceived as leadership got decapitated, became the devil, became in it for a variety of reasons. And Keith McHenry, San Francisco Food Not Bombs, Judy Berry in Redwood Summer, that happened. It's just like every single, and my pattern was I would move from movement to movement to try to avoid that, and then also from place to place to try to duck, bob, and weave. But there's a word for it in corporate America. It's called institutional memory. And I think that radicals in America have adopted what at one time the government imprisoned and murdered and purposely intimidated to create. And it's become a deadly cycle that's limited where we go as a movement in this country. And it makes perfect sense. I mean, if everybody has to recreate the wheel every generation, and you have the people who've gone through 30 or 40 years that can say, well, look, do this, you can try this, and we've tried this before, and here's some resources and the rest. And I think that's part of the reason as well that we've been kind of stuck in a rut in terms of radicalism in America, is this knee-jerk decapitation of leadership. And often, sometimes it's from, when cliques are forming, and, it's a way of people who are just starting to try to seem like, oh, look how radical I am, I'm shit-talking, and but it's amazingly destructive. And I don't know the answer to this. And I've spoken to, I correspond and talk and email with people that I organized with when I was in the 20s that are still organizing. And we all talk about the same problem. It's no mystery among the older activists. We call it the problem, and we're always thinking about it. And I've come up with some solutions that still are not solutions. It still happens. But the year that the American radical movement figures out how to deal with that will be the next year we'll have a revolution in this country. We'll figure out a way to stop tearing ourselves apart and to actually build the communities that we need to support true revolutionary change in this society. So that's that took me 30 minutes to answer one question, but
hey man, that's how it goes. Here, I'll stop this real quick. You want a beer?